Surfers Paradise Raceway was the venue for the Motorcraft 300, billed as the final showdown, the last great race for the super touring cars that had been an integral part of the Australian motorsport scene for more than a decade. The cream of the nation's tin-top talent had elected to contest the 95-lap race, which also doubled as the fourth and final round of the Australian Endurance Championship for both drivers and manufacturers. With the change to the International Group A category from January 1985, the first Sunday in November signalled the end of an era, the last championship appearance of the much modified Group C cars. Only the Commodore V8, with a more standard appearance, will be part of the Group A scenes. Gone will be the Mazda RX-7s and Falcon V8s, arguably Australia's best-known touring car, with a checkered 17-year history of participation in our most popular form of motorsport competition. Starting positions normally count for very little in long-distance racing, but that did not stop a flurry of competition for a front-row spot, with bearded Sydney-sider Alan Grice in the Roadways Commodore setting the pace. Grice took just 2 laps to secure pole position, with a scorching lap of 1 minute 14 seconds, more than 2 seconds better than the European track record held by Alan Moffat. Steve Masterton was in superb touch in his Falcon V8 and soon joined Grice on the front row, while Peter Brock caught up with surfing supremo Grant Kenny before taking to the track. However, Brock was disappointed to find himself listed on the 3rd row, just 1/10 of a second faster than arch-rival Dick Johnson, one of many drivers racing a Falcon V8 for the final time.
I was happy with my qualifying time, but I wasn't happy with the qualifying time that the officials gave me, actually, but not much I could do about it. It was last night before I discovered they gave me a time which was quite a bit slower than what we timed ourselves at, but then again, it's a 95-lap race, so I'm not going to let that niggle me. I think it's better to get that out of the way, concentrate on doing a good start and getting 95 quick laps under our belt.
A little bit unusual to see you and Dick Johnson back on the 3rd row of the grid for a big touring car race.
Yeah, well, that's what Dick said to me. Dick came over and he said, well, I don't know what's going on here. I said, all right, mate. I think the major thing is that, I don't know, I can't speak for Dick, but I'd assume that he's like me. We don't want to be going spending a lot of money on qualifying tyres when it isn't going to affect the outcome of the race. And also, I guess, we're concentrating on our budgets for Group A. Perhaps the other people say, oh, hang on, here's our chance to get Brock and Johnson, you know, nip in there.
While Mazda team driver Greg Hansford was struggling to reach top speed in his RX-7, an intense Alan Moffat played a waiting game, electing to leave his fast lap to the dying minutes of the opening session. The tactic paid off, with Moffat second fastest. Gary Scott did likewise in the Nissan Bluebird, and he was joined on the 2nd row by Hansford, who saved his best for late on Saturday, after mechanics found the right combination with the rotary engine. Well, looking at qualifying very early in the day, I believe you had some carburation problems with the Mazda and you switched to fuel injection for the race.
Yeah, that just eliminated the problem we had with the carburetor, and the fuel-injected engine feels really strong. But, as I said, it took a long while to get everything right, but I'm glad it sort of happened in the last 10 minutes of practice.
Also prominent on the qualifying list were the Kmart team Commodores of Warren Cullen and Andrew Harris, Ron Gillard, Terry Finnegan, Peter McLeod, Bathurst Rookie of the Year Barry Lawrence and David Cox. But it was Grice who had every reason to be happy with his qualifying effort.
We've spent a few days, you know, sorting the car out for the circuit. It hasn't been that easy either. We chased the car actually for 2 days, but we've obviously got the car together now and it's feeling very good.
The Alfa Romeo GTV6 of Colin Bond and Alan Jones topped the qualifiers for the Group A class, and this team were obviously unaffected by the social activities of the previous night. Jones had hosted the opening of his new Alfa Romeo franchise, with the evening doubling as a celebration of the former world champion's 38th birthday. While competition has been intense for grid positions for the Motorcraft 300, there are a lot of other reasons why the leading teams usually come to Surfers Paradise at this time of the year for the big 300-kilometre touring car race. prospect of a hard-fought race between the nation's leading sedan warriors enticed a near-capacity crowd to Surface Raceway for the Motorcraft 300, and the Gold Coast obliged with a hot summer's day. Many fans had obviously anticipated the warm weather, which provided the perfect opportunity for visiting drivers to soak up the sun, and for hundreds of autograph hunters to add to their collections. A chance to mingle as final preparations continued. All the leading contenders had a theory on the way the race would run, and Victorian Peter Brock, dressed for his summer visit to Queensland, was keen to expound his views.
You can see a great crowd here today, a great lot of interest. Cars are looking terrific. Yeah, it's going to be a great race, and I hope it's close down to the wire, and I hope that the crowd see what they came for, and that's probably the closest Group C race ever. It's a sad day, there's no doubt about that. There's some very expensive machinery now going to be just sitting around there.
What happens to the cars after this?
Well, I think perhaps one of my cars will finish up in a museum. The other car may finish up just getting stripped and used for bits and pieces. Maybe it'll be sold. Anyone who wants to talk turkey, of course, can always come to us and have a word, but really, I don't know.
The word is there'll be some pretty quick speedboats around next year.
Exactly. And too, some of these speedway fellas might go pretty well too.
I feel Alan Moffat, as the race progresses, will be the main opposition. I don't believe that the Commodores and Falcons tyres will last as long as ours, and I feel if we have a trouble-free run, it'll be an out-and-out fight between Moffat and I to the end.
Warren in car 8 did a 15.1 loaded a 15.9. Now that year, earlier in the year would have put us 3rd and 4th on the grid. We're now 9th or 8th and 10th. Now that's ridiculous. So I see the first corner as probably the most spectacular corner you've seen in touring cars for the year. They've all had a bit of a fiddle, I'm sure, this weekend. They're all had to win the last big race in touring cars, and I think it's going to be breathtaking.
Well, it's very hot today. I think this is probably one of the hottest days we have had in the whole 4 years that we've been competing here with the Mazda. Fortunately, we're in a position where we don't have to win the championship, so that can dictate our policy a little bit better, our strategy, not policy. Wish we had a policy. And it will really be a case of what the Holdens do. But generally, everybody runs hard here for a while and then settles down. I hope we can do that.
So will you be keeping an eye on anyone particular as the race settles down?
Well, to win the championship, we have to come second to a Commodore, it doesn't matter which one it is. And for Greg and I to win the Drivers' Championship, we have to be on Peter Brock's bumper bar. So it's going to be an interesting aspect, whether it's Grice in the lead or where we are. And I'm not getting too excited until about the 3rd lap comes by and I'm still in one piece, because I got some heavy metal around me today on the meat in the sandwich there on 2nd spot.
Alan Grice in a Commodore had pole position with a time of 1 minute 14 seconds. The Mazda RX-7 of Moffat from position 2 at 1 minute 14.2, with Steve Masterton's Falcon on the outside at 1:14.3. Sharing the second row, Gary Scott's Nissan Bluebird and Greg Hansford's RX-7, both on 1:14.4. From position 6, Brock's Holden Dealer Team Commodore at 1:14.6, just 1/10 faster than Johnson's Big Green Falcon, with the Kmart Commodore of Warren Cullen rounding out the top 8. Glenn Seaton and Craig Harris topped the 3-litre class in near-identical Ford Capris, with the Bond and Jones Alpha heading the Group A qualifiers.
I tell you what, buddy, I reckon I might use the mop in here. Tell you what, it's going to take a few 4Xs to replenish what is taken out in the next 2 hours, I reckon. I reckon the old Big Rooster won't need cooking, mate, when he gets out of that suit, I'll tell you.
Raced away, pole sitter Grice lost the early advantage to Moffat, Scott, Hansford and Masterton, a young man with a point to prove after a disastrous crash at Bathurst. Not so fortunate was Bob Thomas, whose Mazda RX-7 was bumped at the start and executed a spectacular series of flips, bouncing over the bonnet of the Triumph Dolomite driven by Gerald Kay. Rescue crews were quickly on the scene to help Thomas from the overturned wreck. As Moffat led through the first lap, the charging pack came onto the straight to find the ambulance parked out on the track, an additional and unnecessary obstacle for drivers to contend with. With a stunned Thomas safely in the hands of rescuers, the frantic race pace continued, with Masterton, Scott, Grice, Brock, Johnson and Hansford all running hot, behind Moffat's Mazda Rotary. Grice was back in 4th place and not up at his normal front-running position as the field raced around the back section of the course. Moffat's little nimble Mazda once again led them onto the straight, yellow flag still waving for the overturned Mazda RX-7, as Moffat leads the freight train of a tightly bunched group of cars. Brock's fourth and Dick Johnson sixth in the Big Falcon as the cars sweep under Dunlop Bridge through the fastest corner in Australia, and it's Masterton right on Moffat's tail, trying everything he knows. The young Sydney driver with something to prove. A disastrous crash in Bathurst, in fact a clash with Moffat at the start line. Here he edges past, but it can't hold it. A better braking of the Mazda, and Moffat maintains his lead. Brock into third ahead of the Gary Scott Nissan Bluebird, then Grice, Johnson and Hansford. Glenn Seaton leads the 3-litre class with the number 7 Highway Patrol Commodore of Lester Smurden and Wayne Park back in midfield, just ahead of Colin Bond in the Alpha, and then Craig Harris in the Brian Bird Ford Capri. Masterton has lived in the shadow of Dick Johnson for many years in Falcon V8 racing. But here at Service Paradise Raceway, he was really putting the challenge to the flying Alan Moffat. Down the back straight on lap 6, and Masterton puts his move on Moffat. It pays off this time, and he sweeps around the outside to take over the lead. Leaves to hold until lap 19. Brock has moved past Scott into third place, with Grice next, then Johnson, Hansford in the second RX-7, Warren Cullen in the Commodore, and then Johnny Harvey in the second Holden dealer team car. Masterton leads into the S's as David Cox makes an off-track excursion on the back straight. Slippery conditions from midweek rain gave Cox plenty of problems as he tries to get the Mazda back on the track. Bob Holden swings through the left-hander on the back straight in the number 13 Toyota Sprinter, running strongly in the Group A class. Unlucky 13 for Dick Johnson, lap 13 of the 95-lap race, and he comes into the pits, reporting gearbox failure to his team. Taking the Big Falcon behind, Johnson says the race is not over yet for him.
Yeah, Cole, I think there's that much development gone to these cars over the past couple of years that anything between the back of the engine and the wheels, I suppose, is starting to screw up. We don't have diff problems because they're so big and strong, but the gearboxes appear to give us a bit of a problem.
And this is the culprit right here.
Yeah, that's the one.
So what's the plans for the race now?
Well, we'll just put another gearbox in and see if we can go and wreck that one, I suppose.
Warren Cullen was also having early problems with the Kmart Commodore after running strongly in the top 10, coming into the pit area with smoke billowing from the car. On the track, and Masterton still held a narrow advantage over Moffat. However, the Mazda driver was ready to pounce, and despite this brake lock-up, he squeezed through on Masterton, coming into the S's to take over the lead on lap 20. With Brock back in third place and Johnson in the pits, Masterton was showing that his Falcon V8 could match it with Moffat's Mazda, putting on a great battle for the lead. For Warren Cullen, who'd driven so strongly at Bathurst with Alan Jones, the early retirement was a bitter disappointment.
Following closely with the other cars, the heat got into the radiator and the temperatures went off the clock, and it just suddenly got worse. I think it's blown a head gasket actually.
Behind pit lane, Johnson's mechanics worked frantically to put a new gearbox in the Big Falcon. But while they were doing that, Moffat was another of the front runners to strike problems. A puncture forced him into the pits for an unscheduled early stop. His mechanics fitted 4 new tyres and filled the car with fuel, but Moffat now could not afford another stop and would be forced to run almost 60 laps on one set of tyres. One driver not too worried about tyre wear was John Smith in the little Toyota Sprinter, having a great drive in the Group A class in this very competitive 1.6-litre car. Lap 32, and after a break of 19 laps, Dick Johnson takes the Falcon back onto the track. No chance of winning, but hopes to run around until the finish. In spite of his impressive practice time, Alan Grice and Steve Harrington in the road race Commodore haven't been able to come to grips with the front-running pace and never look like winners. Andrew Harris in the second Kmart Commodore now taking over from retired teammate Warren Cullen. And Colin Bond in the Group A Alfa Romeo GTV, already a lap in front of his closest Group A opposition. Following Moffat's puncher, Masterton goes back into the lead from laps 30 to 41. He's driving the Big Falcon hard, and that is soon to tell on the rear suspension. After a brave drive at the head of the field with Moffat, Masterton lips into the pit lane. A broken rear linkage on the suspension has spent the Big Falcon's chances in this 95-lap endurance race.
It was great. The car was terrific. with this being the second last race for the Falcon, we've got that's something to criticise. It's given everything it had and we break the rear suspension, but I don't care. We proved today that we can run with the best, and next year we're going to pick the best car before we start. So half the battle is won. These cars are just too heavy to expect to beat the lighter cars, so it won't happen again next year.
At mid-race, the Nissan team was the first to make its scheduled pit stop. 4 tyres and fuel for Gary Scott's car, with regular team driver George Fury handling the rattle gun duties on the right-hand rear tyre. A slick 25-second stop, and Gary Scott was back out on the track, running in 3rd place behind Brock and Moffat. The pit stop drawing a round of applause from team manager Howard Marsden. Then a flurry of pit activity as Greg Hansford brings the Mazda in, with Peter Brock at the top of the pit lane, about to come back out onto the track. As Brock speeds through to take over 2nd place behind Moffat, as the Mazda team get to work to give Hansford a very fast stop. Once again, 4 tyres and fuel. The RX-7 keeps Hansford in the top 5, and the hopes for Mazda winning the Endurance Championship alive, as Hansford takes the car back onto the track to join teammate Moffat in the battle against Brock's Commodore. Andrew Harris brings the 2nd Kmart Commodore in and makes a driver change. New Zealand champion Gary Sprague taking over the duties for the second half of the race. This was Sprague's first appearance with the Kmart team, and he drove impressively, bringing the Commodore home in 5th outright place, making up for the disappointment of Cullen's earlier retirement. Then the John English Falcon, a car that punched a hole in the concrete wall at Bathurst. Ray Golson started the race, John English taking over here to complete the distance, finishing 9th outright in the Falcon V8. Race leader Alan Grice, who led for a couple of laps while all the other top teams were in, brings the Roadways Commodore in and hands over to young Steve Harrington, a Tasmanian driver regarded as one of the up-and-comers on the Australian touring car scene. Another slick pit stop, but it's not enough to give Grice and Harrington a winning advantage. Spectators at Service Paradise had the chance of hearing conversations between drivers during the race. Here Jeff Russell talks into a special 2-way radio system connected to Barry Lawrence, the Bathurst Rookie of the Year, driving the Bayside Spares Commodore. During the race, comments from both drivers went over the PA system, enabling spectators to hear just what goes on in the tactics of major race teams. Jeff Russell taking over now for the 2nd stint in the car, which ran 5th outright at Bathurst. Another strong performance from this pair gave them 7th outright in the Motorcraft 300, just as Craig Harris brings the Ford Capri in for the Brian Burt Ford team, a team that was very busy in the pit area, actually servicing 6 cars during a 300-kilometre race. Another impressive drive from this Brisbane 19-year-old takes the Capri back out on the track to eventually finish 16th outright and 1st in the under 3-litre class. No sooner had the leading teams made their one necessary mid-race pit stop than they cast an anxious eye skywards to see some big black clouds hovering overhead. As a result, the Groove wet weather tyres came out with pit crews at the ready in case of a downpour. Peter Brock had been prepared to run back in 3rd place in the early stages, but after his pit stop, he put the pressure on, building up speed to take the lead from Moffat, and in the second half of the race, he was never headed. In the boondocks and out of contention is Gary Scott in the Nissan Bluebird. He'd applied the pressure after his pit stop and caught up 10 seconds on Moffat's Mazda, and had challenged for 2nd place. However, as Scott explains, things didn't go quite according to plan during the passing manoeuvre.
I was making a bit of a run to the front, and I ran across Alan, and he didn't want to give me the corner when I was going about 2 to hit 1, and he just moved over on me and slid me into the grass, and I couldn't help but hit him. It's one of those things that happen in motor racing, very disappointing. He won that one, I lost. We just spent a steering rod, and it can't be fixed quickly. The car was running beautifully, and really we're ready to make a big charge.
Was the car good enough to get to the front, do you think?
Oh, definitely. We were catching Moffat hand over fist, and in fact I would have passed him. Motor racing's a lot of ifs and maybes, but I felt very confident.
With Scott out, the front-running order settled down. Peter Brock out in front with a handy lead and stretching that each lap over Alan Moffat. The battle for 3rd place was between Steve Harrington and Greg Hansford, and Harrington not wanting to give in the Commodore. But Hansford, the former motorcycle champion with many great victories on this track to his credit, also persisted, and he got the upper hand in the late stages to move into 3rd place. And it was that move which gave Mazda enough points to clinch the Australian Endurance Championship for manufacturers. However, it was Peter Brock capping a great year for GMH, winning the final Australian Championship race for Group C touring cars. At the checkered flag, there was an advantage of more than a minute over Alan Moffat's Mazda, with Greg Hansford just a car length away in third place. Fourth place to Alan Grice and Steve Harrington in the Roadways Commodore. Fifth going to another Commodore, driven by Andrew Harris and Gary Sprague. Then Johnny Harvey and David Parsons in the second dealer team car. Seventh place going to Barry Lawrence and Jeff Russell in a Commodore. Eighth to Terry Finnegan. Ninth to John English and Ray Gelson in a Falcon V8. And Ron Gillard in a Mazda RX-7, rounding out the top 10. As a forerunner to 1985, the Group A class saw a 1-2 result for Alfa Romeo. Colin Bond and Alan Jones winning in a GTV6, with a similar car driven by Ray Gulson in second place. Third went to Greville Arnell, driving a Mitsubishi Starion. At the end of the race, the huge crowd spilled out onto the track to see a delighted Peter Brock pick up the accolades for winning the Motorcraft 300. But just to remind the Victorian driver of home, he was greeted by a torrential downpour.
We had a trouble-free run. Our pit stops were fantastic. I did a 24 or 25 second pit stop there, which was fabulous. It put me out on even terms with Moffat again, and I ran close to him for quite a while there, gradually building a lead. And that was the story of the race, really. It was a matter of getting a gap and then conserving. Good race, actually, a very enjoyable race.
Well, after a year's work and our losses at Bathurst, that I suppose is some sweet revenge, but not a lot. But it does show the tremendous competitive factor the RX-7 has, and I want to thank everyone at Mazda that's helped us do it.